Om Namo
Bhagavate
Vasudevaya.
So reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, chapter 3, text 32. I'll read the text and then some of you can repeat. Ata param yat avyaktam avyuda guna brimhitam adrista shruta vastu twat sajivo yat punar bhava. Ata param yat avyaktam avyudha guna brimhitam adrista shruta vastu twat sajivo yat punar bhava. Ata param yat avyaktam avyudha guna brimhitam adrista shruta vastu twat sajivo yat punar bhava. Someone else?
Ata param yadavyaktam avyudha gunabrimhitam adrishta shuta vastutvat satjivo yat punarbhava.
Taparam yat avyaktam avyudha guna brimitam ashruta vastutvat sajivo yat purnambhava.
अतः परम यद्व्यक्तं व्यूढगुणव्रहीतम् अदृष्ट्वा श्रुतवस्तुत्वात् सजीवो यत् पुनर्भवः.
Anyone else? Mataji's?
Ata param yada avyaktam avyudha guna brimhitam adrishta shruta vastutvat sajivo yat punarbhavaha. Hare Krishna.
Ata param yada vyaktam avyudha gunabhimhitam adrishta shrita vastutvat sajivo yat punarbhava.
Hare Krishna. Atah param yad avyaktam avyuda guna brimhitam adrishta sruta vastutvat sajivo yat punarbhavaha. Hare Krishna.
Yeah.
Ata param yad avyaktam avyudha guna brihitam adrishta sruta vastutvat sajiva yat punarbhava.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Atah param yada tat yatkam yudam guna bruhitamam adrusta sutavastu vasta sajivo yat punarbhavaha. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Word for word, ata, this, param, beyond, yat, which, avyaktam, unmanifested, avyudha, without formal shape, guna brimhitam, affected by the qualities, adrista, unseen, asruta, unheard, vastutvat, being like that, sa, that, jivaha, living being, yat, that which, puna bhava, takes birth repeatedly. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Beyond this gross conception of form is another subtle conception of form, which is without formal shape and is unseen, unheard, and unmanifest. The living being has his form beyond this subtlety. Otherwise, he could not have repeated births. Purport. All the gross cosmic manifestation is conceived as the gigantic body of the Lord. So also there is the conception of his subtle form, which is simply realized without being seen, heard, or manifested. But in fact, all these gross or subtle conceptions of the body are in relation with the living beings. The living being has his spiritual form beyond this gross material or subtle psychic existence. The gross body and psychic functions cease to act as soon as the living being leaves the visible gross body. In fact, we say that the living being has gone away because he is unseen and unheard. Even when the gross body is not acting, when the living being is in sound sleep, we know that he is within the body by his breathing. So the living being's passing away from the body does not mean that there is no existence of the living soul. It is there. Otherwise, how can he repeat his births again and again? The conclusion is that the Lord is eternally existent in his transcendental form, which is neither gross nor subtle like that of the living being. His body is never to be compared to the gross and subtle bodies of the living beings. All such conceptions of God's body are imaginary. The living entity has his eternal spiritual form, which is conditioned only by material contamination. Om Agyanati Mirandasya Jananjanan Salakaya Chakshu Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sari Gaur Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So, just looking for something real quick. Okay, here we go. Yeah. So this is, for me, in discussing this particular verse, it brings to mind the limitations that we're all faced with in trying to understand transcendental knowledge. In the mundane society, they sometimes use this phrase, above my pay grade, to indicate something that is beyond your capacity. We all have our certain levels of capacity, which are born of our endeavors in education, in work, in the arts. So we develop a certain level of competence or competency. So then we try to process everything. Not that we try, but we do. We process everything through our limited capacity, abilities to understand whatever it might be. Even in the mundane world, not everyone understands everything at the same level. A little child, like Srila Prabhupada always gave this example of little children, they see something from their perspective, like the example of fire for an inexperienced child. And they see the fire, it looks really beautiful, it's very bright, feeling is really nice, but they don't have the capacity to understand the dangers of that fire. So then, through their process of ascending knowledge, they go and they touch it. The father will say, don't touch it. It's very dangerous, because his level of understanding is much more sophisticated, much more experienced knowledge. So then he tells the child, don't do it. Child still wants to experience it. And then they touch it, and then they realize, oh my God, it's different from what I thought. I thought it was this, but in reality, it's that. So in terms of our spiritual life, we also have this tendency to see things based on our level of comprehension of the situation. Even in Krishna consciousness, we may be reading a particular verse, like this verse today, and based on our understanding of Krishna consciousness, we see it in a certain way. For me, from my limited capacity, I'm feeling the focus on the unseen, as is explained here, the unseen, adrishta, unseen, and also ashruta, unheard. So there are things beyond our capacity, but sometimes we're not willing to accept that. So then we process the thing through our limited capacity and leave it at that, not realizing that there's another level of Krishna conscious understanding. We were having this discussion this past weekend with His Holiness Sri Dayananda Maharaj, who was giving a lecture in Atlanta. And I posed a question at the end of the lecture because he was describing about using our intelligence, logic, especially the term logic and reasoning, because most of us are attached to this concept of logic. We try to see things logically, but we have to understand the limitations of logic. If we process everything in Krishna consciousness through logic, not applying the logic to Krishna consciousness. And then there's a verse I'll share with you in a moment about that. So I asked this question. I said, Maharaj, there's mundane logic, which is limited. It goes to a certain point within the modes of material nature, within the material world. But isn't it beyond that, avyakta, that beyond that realm is not subject to human logic? That's where the problem is. We're trying to understand God with our logic, but his existence is beyond our logic. So some of the things that God does, and Maharaj was speaking about the idea that God doing things that are not acceptable by human beings. Why does God do this and why does God do that? God is not a mean God. Why would God, So yes, within the realm of our mundane understanding, some things are not logical that Krishna does. Why this whole battlefield of Kurukshetra? It's not logical because he wanted something to be accomplished. Why so many people have to die? What, 640 million people have to die for God to have what he wanted? It's not logical. Doesn't make sense in the mundane sphere. But Krishna had a plan. So that plan is above human logic. You can't bring God down to human logic. Some things do work within human logic, just like, do unto others as you have them do unto yourself. So many different things that we may say that are part of our human existence. And so God sometimes acts in such a way within the realm. And he also says in Bhagavad Gita that he himself follows these different paths. If he didn't, then the world would be ruined if Krishna didn't set the example. Therefore, he gives that verse in 3rd chapter, text 21, the Yat Yata Chariti, that whatever a great man does, common men follow in his footsteps. So he gives credence to the idea of setting standards. But sometimes God goes beyond that for his own purposes. And it may not fit our logic. That happens on an individual basis, that happens on a collective basis, and sometimes on a universal basis. So we have to begin to understand that there are levels of realization that are beyond human understanding, how God reciprocates. And then also remember that each one of us, and this is another point that Maharaj and myself were discussing, that we're all realizing differently based on our devotional service. And not just the devotional service, but the quality of the devotional service. We can perform devotional service in various ways, and it's not all pure, because there is pure devotional service, and then there's devotional service that has the contamination of our limitations. The devotional service itself is 100% pure, but our execution is different. So therefore, we were discussing the verse that we all know, Tesam satatayuktanam bhajitam pritipurvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yenamamupuyantite. So it was a very beautiful discussion on that point. And Maharaj was also emphasizing what I love so much, bhajitam pritipurvakam and dadami buddhi yogam. He gives the understanding, but it's based on bhajitam pritipurvakam, the quality of the love that we demonstrate when we perform our service. So the main thing is improve our service, which will improve our understanding. Vasudeve Bhagavati, Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha, Janayadya Suvairagyam, Gyanam Charyada Haitukam. Causeless knowledge and detachment. Causeless means no cause. By engaging in the service of Vasudeva, personality of Godhead, one gets causeless knowledge. It's not academic. And I've said this so many times, sometimes it sounds like I'm putting down academic endeavors. Not at all. Not at all. Someone like I don't have academic credentials, for lack of a better phrase. I don't have PhDs and college degrees and all those kinds of things. So it may appear that, well, Balabhadra, you don't have those things, so you don't appreciate those things. That's not the point. The point is by devotional service whatever I need in order to do the most important work, which is going back to Godhead. Going back to Godhead is the important work. So whatever education I need, Krishna supplies that. And he has for all the years of my devotional service. He doesn't give me a lot. He gives me enough to stay enthusiastic about this process and this movement and devotees and association devotees, taking prasadam, all these kinds of things. It's so funny, like I said, in the beginning, I had no appreciation for all these things. And I always tell the story how when they first gave me prasadam halava, like I'm showing a difference in levels of appreciation. So now I love halava, but when I first received it, I hated it. I couldn't stand the taste. It looked funny. I had a limited capacity by direct experience and also from hearing, because no one ever told me what they gave me halava, but no one said what it was. So I thought, what is this? In fact, in the quote unquote old days, our lead brahmachari, Radha Mohan Prabhu, he taught us how to give a not Sunday lecture, but how to talk to guests on Sunday. Because he understood that the guests don't know, you're giving them this plate of something. They have no idea what this stuff is, prasadam. He said, you sit and you talk to them, you explain to them everything on that plate. This is halava, it's made like this, and it tastes like that, because they don't know what it tastes like. They may look at something, think it's sweet, and might be bitter. So you explain everything to them, because their ability to comprehend it's limited by their experience, by their hearing. Their intelligence is not ready. I mean, the intelligence is there, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. The intelligence is actually coming from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, right? Sarvasya chaham ridishani visto matasmatir ganamapohanam cha vedasya savaraham eva veja vedantakrit veda vedechaham eva chaham. So it's coming from Krishna, but it has to be trained. Like I said, the little child has intelligence, but it's limited. So by its limited intelligence, it makes mistakes, dangerous mistakes. So we have to gradually build up our capacity to appreciate Krishna consciousness. But we have to have faith in the process in order to get the ability to appreciate on a deeper level. Otherwise, our appreciation will remain limited by our limited capacities. Prabhupada called it in one place, I believe it was a BTG article. He mentioned this idea of link up with the unlimited. You want to become unlimited? Link up with the unlimited. And then another place he used this phrase, designative disqualification. And that's an important concept to think about. Designative disqualification. What does that mean? The child, by his designation, is disqualified for understanding bigger things in life. You wouldn't give a child, like yesterday I was with my grandkids and my little granddaughter, she's so funny. One granddaughter, I'm teaching her Bhagavad Gita because she's 11 years old and she's learning a little bit. The other one's 6 and she's barely learning how to read, but she loves to take the Bhagavad Gita and give her own purports. I don't know. She just picks up the Bhagavad Gita. She wouldn't let her sister do her thing. So she took the Bhagavad Gita and started explaining to her capacity. And the essence of what she said was, we should all love God. We should all serve God. And I was like, she knows the book is spiritual, but she can't really read it, but she knows a little bit of the conclusion. So we all should try to be good to each other. We should all serve God. I was just laughing like anything. Her little bit of understanding, which is enhanced by her grandfather's sharing whatever little bit I can share based on her designative disqualification. The disqualification part is that she's very young. She can't understand, but Bhajitam Priti Purvagam, all these big high philosophical points, but I can bring it down to her understanding. As in the case of Srila Prabhupada coming to the West, we'll be celebrating very soon. Prabhupada's arriving in America, and he understood by analysis, by his great ability to comprehend things and then to process those things through his deep understanding and give words and meanings that will last for centuries. So he said, my dear Lord, most of the people here are in ignorance, forgetting you. But you have put them into ignorance because you're the great mystic. You're the great master. Vayadyaksena Prakriti. It's all working under you. I know that, Lord. You cannot fool me. I know they're working under your control. Therefore, since they're under your control, please, I'm begging you, please, make my words suitable for their understanding. He didn't do it the other way. make them, whatever. He said, no, make my words that I have to speak on your behalf suitable for their designative disqualifications, their inabilities. He knew that before even beginning to speak in this country. He knew that we would have a problem understanding. It was so funny when he was in Atlanta. He said that when he thought about coming to America, he thought, I will go there and I will tell them, give up, the four regulative principles, give up this, give up that, give up this, give up that. And Prabhupada said, they will say, Swamiji, please go home. Please go back to your India. We don't want to hear that, which was the case. During the 60s, was it sex, drugs, and rock and roll was the prevailing mentality. So Prabhupada understood our designative disqualifications, boys and girls running after sex, sense enjoyment. So he brought the philosophy in such a way that would give them exposure, repeated exposure to the truth, to the real philosophy, because they had been hearing so many wrong philosophies. So now Prabhupada patiently, we might use the word groomed his devotees, knowing their limitations. So because we've spent so many years cultivating mundane intelligence, we have to be careful not to allow the mundane cultivation of intelligence, or the level of intelligence that we cultivated prior to Krishna consciousness, to eclipse our surrendering in this circumstance in our life, because it does. Sometimes we hesitate to surrender because it doesn't make sense. It's not logical. Certain things are not logical. But remember, there's things above logic, human logic. So when I talk about logic, I love this verse, and I quoted this to Maharaj on Sunday, and he loved to hear it again, from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Leela 8, chapter 15, for your reference, if you'd like to look at it later. Again, Adi Leela 8, text 15. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Dhoya Karaha Vichar, Vichar Kalile Chite Pabe Chamatkar. Translation: if you're indeed interested in logic and argument, now who isn't? We all are. If you're indeed interested in logic and argument, kindly apply it, meaning logic and argument, to the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. If you do so, you will find it to be strikingly wonderful. Oh, thank you. That's the verse. Yes. Strikingly wonderful. How beautiful. Look at the phrasing. If you're indeed interested in logic and argument, and as I said, who isn't? Any of you who have pursued an educational path, whatever it might be, you studied this. And Prabhupada many times talked about the logic that he learned in college. He learned many things through logic, and he knew about some of the logicians and philosophers. So if you have an interest in that, fine. We don't condemn logic. That's why I said, it may sound like I'm putting down an educational pursuit. I am not. I am saying take that propensity, that tendency, and apply it to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mercy. This is very specific. To his mercy, you will be strikingly wonderful. It's like when Nityananda and Haridas, when they were confronted with Jagai Madai, they had not approached them, but by careful analysis, they knew, especially Nityananda knew, these two people represent the worst of humankind. We can see it. The drunkards and so many things. So one of the passers-by that were leaving that place where all the commotion was with Jagai Madai, and so they asked, who is this person? Who are they? Oh, they were formerly brahmanas and whatever, but they become so debauched. It's so bad, So if you read Chaitanya Bhagavad, you'll see many details about that pastime. But Nityananda, with his, of course, he's Balaram. Balaram Hoilo Nitai. So we can't compare ourselves to Nityananda, but Nityananda conducted himself in such a way that we can follow. We don't imitate, we can follow. Like Mahajano Yenagata Sapanta, follow in the footsteps. So that example is there. So by his careful analysis, just like Srila Prabhupada, analyzing a place he had never been before, but he understood what was happening by the shape of the buildings and the whole commotion of Western society. He understood these people are in ignorance. Look at the society they've built. It's an ignorant society. Krishna, please help them. So then Nityananda thought, if these two guys who represent the worst of human society. Now, remember, I'm trying to show you how, well, not show you, but we're discussing about the mercy of Chaitanya. So Nityananda, Shastra Chakshusha, seeing things through the spiritual Shastric eyes, he said, if we can make these two people Krishna conscious, then people will understand the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He's applying his logic to this mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He's saying if we can make these two Krishna conscious, then people will understand. And even when Jagat Madai became, converted into Krishna consciousness, people were not sure because they had been so bad before. So people were not really sure had they really changed because it seemed impossible. Like for me, when I became a brahmachari, and one of my old girlfriends came to visit at the temple, unannounced. She just showed up at the brahmachari ashram one day and knocked on the door, and some devotees said, Bhakta Ben, there's a girl outside looking for you. And I went, really? What is that? Who is it? I don't know. It happened to be this friend of mine from my musical days. And she was not sure that I had changed. She knew I had left the scene, the music scene, the sense gratification scene, but she wasn't sure. So she came to check to make sure that I had changed. And then she said, I'm very happy for you. I see. She didn't say, I see that you have changed, but she said, I'm very happy for you. Because she could appreciate from where I came from to where I was standing there as a brahmachari in Krishna consciousness. So Nityananda and Haridas, they made that effort based on logical conclusion, that if we can make these two people Krishna conscious, then Lord Chaitanya's strikingly wonderful mercy will be understood by the general mass of people. And it was so to this day. In fact, in that verse, Sri Krishna Chaitanya Doya. What is that Doya? Like Parama Karuna Pohundui Janya, in that beautiful bhajan. Doya is mentioned. I can't remember the verse right now, but this mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Nityananda Prabhu. And by virtue of our practice, we develop a certain level of mercy by the grace of the Lord. So all of that is due to exposure. I was discussing this with Haryasha Prabhu yesterday about the idea of exposure. So what are we exposing ourselves to in order to be able to comprehend the presence of the Lord? What are we doing to enhance or improve that ability to understand his presence? So there's a verse in the Srimad Bhagavatam that, I don't know, I consider one of my favorite verses. Some of you may be conscious of it. You've probably read it. They've maybe not gotten into it as deeply. But I was, meaning back in the days when I was being trained as a brahmachari, our lead brahmachari, Radha Mohan Prabhu, he took us through this verse because in this verse in purport, there's a scientific process of being able to perceive the Lord based on our designative disqualifications. And Srila Prabhupada very carefully arranges this purport in a systematic, logical way. Again, logic, okay? Logic and reasoning. He puts it there. So the verse for your reference is Canto 2, text number 2. I'm sorry, Canto 2, chapter 2, text 35. And I'm just going to go through some of it, the parts that I think would be relevant to our discussion today about the unseen, because that's part of the verse that we're discussing, about the unseen, the unheard aspects of the Lord's existence. So the verse goes like this. Bhagavan sarvabhuteshu lakshita swatmana hari drishyar budya dibir drashta lakshanaya anumapakai. Translation. The personality of God as Shri Krishna is in every living being, along with the individual soul. And this fact is perceived and hypothesized in our acts of seeing and taking help from the intelligence. So what I want to talk about here is what is this intelligence and how important it is. Purport. The general argument of the common man is that since the Lord is not visible to our eyes, thank you for posting that, He's not visible to our eyes. How can one either surrender unto him or render transcendental loving service unto him? Very logical, based on your limitation. Based on the person's limitation, common man means limited intelligence. So he comes up with this argument. So, to such a common man, here is a practical suggestion given by Srila Sukadeva Goswami as to how one can perceive the Supreme Lord by reason and perception. So, again, giving credence to logic, argument, reason, perception, all the things that we know. These are words that we know, these are concepts that we know. Actually, the Lord is not perceivable by our present materialized senses. But when one is convinced of the presence of the Lord by a practical service attitude, there is a revelation by the Lord's mercy. And such a pure devotee of the Lord can perceive the Lord's presence always and everywhere. Now, this next sentence revolutionized my thinking when I first heard it and how it was being explained by Radha Mohan Prabhu. So it says, he can perceive that intelligence. Now you have to keep this in perspective. Intelligence is the form direction of the Paramatma plenary portion of the personality of Godhead. I don't know why and I don't know how I was able to, get a little bit of an understanding of that as a young devotee, but somehow this really resonated. To this day, when I hear that phrase, okay, the Lord is the intelligence is the form direction of the Lord. So I did a little, because I never really looked up the phrase form direction. And I thought last night, you know what, let me look it up. Guess what? There is no such grouping of words. I looked on Google, I looked everywhere. There's no grouping that says form direction. There is form, and then there's direction. So what does Prabhupada mean? Form direction. I had looked up the words, but I don't know if I even saved it, but maybe if I can pull it up. But it was just very interesting, the concept of form direction. So direction, like the way in which we do something, like you receive some directions to do something, and the form is the shape that it may take. Form direction. So the super soul, the intelligence is the form direction. Like you give directions in a certain format. Like right now, we're speaking through Zoom. So we're using this format of Zoom to try and share back and forth. So the super soul is using his own Zoom. He has a Zoom project. It's called your intelligence. So through your intelligence, that form, you're receiving all this directions. But the problem is our intelligence has been in the forest of material enjoyment too long. That's also mentioned in we don't have time to go into the whole thing, but in the 5th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, when it talks about the forest of material enjoyment, actually, what is that chapter? It's entitled, the material world as the great forest of enjoyments. Extensive discussions about that there. You should look at it sometimes. So we have traveled in this material world and we've allowed ourselves to be affected by the things in the society around us, our family, our community, our friends, our educational pursuits, whatever it might have been. It's infected our intelligence. So then we start seeing Krishna consciousness if we're not careful, if we don't pay attention, if we don't remember. Of course, remembrance is based on Krishna, so therefore devotional service is the prerequisite, so we have good memory by the grace of the Lord. So can we keep remembering what to do and what not to do? Not like a demoniac. They don't know what to do and what not to do. We should know what to do and what not to do. So then we go into this material world, we accumulate all this nonsense, knowledge, useless, until we come to Krishna consciousness. Then we take all those zeros on useless knowledge, useless information, useless experiences, all those zeros, and we put a 1, Krishna consciousness. Then all that useless stuff becomes useful. Education, like for me, I had a music career going when I joined the movement, but it was a mundane, materialistic, ridiculous lifestyle. 0, 0, 0, 0. But I thought it was like hundreds and thousands. I'm great, so wonderful. 0, 0, 0. But then my temple president showed me how to take all those zeros and put a 1. And the 1 was write songs about Krishna, produce music about Krishna. So from 1975 until this day, myself and especially my god sister Nardi Devi Dasi, we've done so many songs and music and albums and all kinds of stuff with the 1 added to the zeros. Otherwise, it was useless. So all of this stuff that we've accumulated without Krishna consciousness is useless. Until we add Krishna consciousness, becomes useful. As like Rida Nanamaj was saying on Sunday, that Srila Prabhupada told him, you finished your college. Then you can use that to preach to the intelligent class of people. Sarup Damodar Maharaj, PhD. Sadaputa, PhD. Of course, our own Vishnu Prabhu, they're in Philadelphia, PhD. So they take all this knowledge because now they know what the 1 is. You got to find the 1. The 1 is important. This is a mundane example, but in the music world, a gentleman named James Brown, he's a very famous musician. So he would be so intense with his musician. They had to know where the 1 was. If you study his music, which I have, it's all based on the 1. A lot of music is not based on the 1, but James Brown said it has to be on the 1. So we have to have that 1, which is Krishna consciousness, and you add that to everything else you do. Then it becomes useful. Otherwise, it's practically useless. So this intelligence is the super soul's, the mechanism that he's using in our limited state to help guide us. Because when we become purified, pure devotees, then the Lord directly speaks to us. Oh, that doesn't sound logical. It is, but you have to have the ability to see it logically. As in the case, so here's a good example of a devotee with his limited experience trying to explain something which is unlimited in the presence of Srila Prabhupada. Many of you may have heard this lecture, or no, it's an interview where Srila Prabhupada is being interviewed by a reporter. And Rameshwar Prabhu was there in the room, and Prabhupada speaking. So Prabhupada explains how Krishna speaks to the devotee. Now Rameshwar, looking at this person, I think it was a lady, thinking that she doesn't have the ability to understand that statement. So let me try to explain it. Let me edit Prabhupada's statement so that she can understand it. Let me edit that statement. Be careful with editing, right? So he wanted to edit the statement. He said, no, what Prabhupada, in front of Prabhupada, what Prabhupada means is that the Lord, speaks to the devotee through his intelligence. Prabhupada says, no, in front of Rameswar and that report. He said, no, God speaks directly to the pure devotee. No intermediate, directly to the pure devotee. Like Prabhupada said, these books, these purports, I didn't write them. Krishna has written them. These are my emotional ecstasies. Be careful with Prabhupada's purports because Krishna is speaking through Prabhupada's writing. This is Krishna. So we should be so attentive to these purports that Srila Prabhupada has given us by Krishna's revealing to him. So Prabhupada corrected his disciple. You're wrong. That's your limit. Now you're trying to recognize her limit. No, Krishna speaks directly. So the super soul, when we are in the conditioned state, is guiding us. Like sometimes we use the phrase misused intelligence. Think about that. What does it mean, misuse intelligence? What is intelligence? How do you misuse it? Like you can misuse a gun, you can misuse a car, you can misuse, I don't know, pharmaceuticals. How do you misuse something you can't even see? Can't see the intelligence, can't see the mind. Prabhupada would jokingly say, we know you have a mind, we know you have intelligence, but we can't see it. So in our conditioned state, the more we expose ourselves to Krishna consciousness, as in reading Srila Prabhupada's books, as in chanting the holy names of the Lord, as in chanting bhajans and trying to understand the emotions of the acharyas, our intelligence begins to improve. Purifying. Something is getting purified. What is that? Srimvata Swakata Krishna, Punya Shravana Kirtana, Ridyantasto Yabhadrani, Vidunoti Surisatam. The Lord is in the heart. He's cleansing, he's purifying, he's making all the arrangements so that we can understand, so that we can hear his sweet voice through the intelligence. He's saying, I can communicate with you. Just like we're on Zoom, and if your internet connection is not good, your Zoom won't be good. You won't get a good connection, or even your cell phone. So Krishna is saying, I can give you instructions by which you can come to me. I only need something from you. What is that, Krishna? Bhajitam priti purvakam. That's all I need from you. When you do your service, whatever it is, washing the pots, we've all heard it, wash the pots, clean the floor, do the arti, because there's no difference between doing the arti and cleaning the floor. Now you may say, Balabhadra, that's not logical. Well, let me give you some clarity here. Something I heard directly from Srila Prabhupada. I think Vishnu, maybe you were there in 1976 in Vrindavan, and Prabhupada was speaking about this, and he described it, and it's in the database, you can find it. He said, you think here is Krishna on the altar because you think here is Krishna. He said, but you don't realize this floor is also Krishna. This is also Krishna. So you neglect the floor and you go to the deity. He said, because you don't understand. Your level of understanding is limited. You know, I know in the old days, we were very careful how we walked on the floor because in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna asked Krishna, someone is transcendental in consciousness. How does he speak? How does he walk? How does he sit? So we were trained, don't make noise when you walk in the temple. It disturbs the deity. Like when Prabhupada was in Atlanta giving the lecture in the morning and the devotees in the kitchen was only maybe 30 feet away from Prabhupada in the way our temple was configured. So devotees were chop, chop, chop in the kitchen, Kardama Muni especially, just frantically getting the Sunday feast ready, chop, 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 making noise, not realizing Prabhupada's on the other side of the wall. And then Prabhupada in the lecture says, what is that clicking sound? What is that sound? He was disturbed by that sound. So one should be careful how he speaks. One should be careful how he walks. One should be careful how he acts. What is that careful? That's Krishna, Super Soul, guiding you through your intelligence, telling you what to do, what not to do. So in essence, even though this may be beyond our capacity, it's difficult to understand Krishna is so beyond our capacity. But if we humbly, which is the first quality of developing knowledge, humility, not being anxious for the satisfaction of being honored by others, if we practice that, then gradually, Krishna, through our intelligence now, will guide us because we'll have these reference points. When we encounter things in life, we'll have all these amazing metrics and reference points from the Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, Nectar of Devotion, Nectar of Instruction, Ishopanishad, the list goes on and on and on. Prayers of Queen Kunti, Easy Journey to Other Planets. These are our metrics. This is how we deal with life. This is our paradigm shift, all of it. Shastra Chakshusa. So even though we can't see Krishna in his pure transcendental form, he's presented himself in such a way that we can see him. And I would highly advise you to study, because there's not enough time to go into this, second canto, second chapter, text 35, about the form direction, intelligence being the form direction. So a lot more details in that purport to sort of help you put it in perspective, how it is that we can improve our capacity to understand the unseen personality of Godhead, because he can't be seen in our present material vision. Atashi Krishna namadi nabhave graham indriya sevan mukhe hidilada swayameva spratyada. But when we purify, then we can begin to perceive, even in this state, even on this side of the equation, where we're not pure devotees yet. Krishna's not talking directly to us. Some devotees even foolishly say Krishna's talking to them. That's almost like a Christian thing. Here's a jokingly way to look at it. God talks to me, and I would ask the Christian, well, what kind of voice does he have? Is it bass like that or high like that? No, not like that. Then what are you talking about? Not like that. What does it sound like? You say he's talking to you. No, I don't mean like that. So in Krishna consciousness, we don't make that mistake in the stages that we are. We don't say Krishna's directly speaking to us. He's speaking directly through Bhagavad Gita. But the level of our intelligence to understand what he's saying is the real issue. We have to use those zeros, material accumulated knowledge and systems, use those zeros by adding the one. But if you use those zeros without the one, without the Krishna consciousness, your ability to surrender will be hampered. You'll be hampered by the zeros. But if you add the one of Krishna consciousness, the zeros become a great addition to your process of making advancement. So I'll stop there. I know time is running, but if anyone has a question or comment, or Vishnu Gadapagu, would you like to share something on that? Or
Hare Krishna, Balabhadra, Prabhu.
Hari
Thank you.
Bol, Prabhu, my dear God brother.
in the purport, we were talking about the spiritual form, and there's a line that I had a discussion with a devotee about one time. It says the gross body and psychic functions cease to act as soon as the living being leaves the visible gross body.
Yes.
So this devotee was saying that in the spiritual body, there's no mind or no psychic functions.
Hmm.
What would you say about that?
So he's saying in the spiritual body, there are no psychic functions.
Or no mind? No mind. Yeah, no mind.
Yeah,
Those
and
are
that's a big discussion, because right now we have the mind, intelligence, and false ego. So those things the false ego doesn't exist, but spiritual mind, spiritual intelligence, and the spiritual sense of ego, aham brahmasmi, I'm spirit. So how that works in the spiritual world, again, as I started to talk, some things are above our pay grade. So that's kind of way above my head in sense of what does that really mean? Because I'm trying to understand that. So there's inside, outside right now. So the inside of us means we have this subtle body. And actually in that purport talks about that. Let's see. You just mentioned that the gross body and psychic functions cease to act as soon as the living being leaves the visible gross body. In fact, we say that the living being has gone away because it's unseen and unheard. So this gross and subtle body that we have now stands to reason by spiritual understanding that we won't have the same configuration when we go back to Godhead. But what is it there? Do we have stomachs? Is another crazy question. They eat in the spiritual world, so do they have stomachs? Oh, if they have a stomach, that means there's something separate within the spiritual body. We're talking about spiritual form, right? At the end of the purport, the living being has his eternal spiritual form, which is conditioned only by his material contamination. So we have this spiritual form conditioned by material nature, like a diamond covered by mud. So when we go back to Godhead, or even before going back to Godhead, when the spiritual body becomes manifest, what is it? We always say Sat Chit Ananda, correct? We all say that, Sat Chit Ananda. But what does that mean? Do we have stomachs? Do we have hearts? Do we have lungs? And I get stumped on that one. I mean, Vishnu God, maybe you can help me on that, because I can't really answer that 100%. But I know that the Bhagavad Gita says there's 5 subject matters in the Bhagavad Gita. And one of the 5 subjects is not eternal, and that's karma. Everything else is eternal. Prakriti, Jiva, Ishwar, and Kala. Those are the 4 eternal aspects. So everything falls within the 4 eternal aspects. The karma is no longer there, the action and reaction. But Prakriti is eternal, because Prakriti, or the material energy, is non-different from the spiritual energy, just used in a different way. Supreme Lord is there, Jiva soul is there, and the time, spiritual time, eternal time is there. But trying to understand the construction of the spiritual body, like I said, I'm very limited in being able to explain that. I don't know. Do you have any further thoughts, Vishnu Prabhu?
Well, you mentioned in the beginning that there's a spiritual mind, spiritual intelligence, and spiritual ego. Yeah, that's I also read that in Srila Prabhupada said that. So in this verse, when it says, let's see, the gross body and psychic functions cease to act. So really, it means the gross body and gross psychic functions, because you can, according to grammar, the gross body and gross psychic functions.
Yes.
Because there's the mind and intelligence, spiritual mind and intelligence are there in the spiritual world. Yes.
Yeah. Yes, like I said, I'm still trying to understand. I'm not really pursuing it that much, but I hope I get a realization someday. You could say, what's inside the spiritual body? Wait a minute. Is there the spirit, is the soul inside the spiritual body, just like in the material world? Or is the spiritual body the soul? And to the limit of my capacity to understand, the spiritual body is you. There's no separation between the inside of you and the outside of you. There's an old song, I think was the Beatles or something like that, inside you, outside you. So there's no inside outside as far as I understand. I qualified by saying as far as I understand. It doesn't mean my understanding is 100%. I'm just saying as far as I understand, there's no inside outside. But what's inside? It's like, I don't know. Anyone else? Any other questions? Jonah, I see you there.
Balabhadra, Balabhadra.
Hare Krishna. Krishna
Yes,
Kirtan, you go
please.
first. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Hare Krishna, Balabhadra Prabhu.
Hare
Please
Krishna, Prabhu.
follow this.
Is that Krishna Kirtan?
Yes, yes.
Hare Bo, Prabhu.
Yeah, it's interesting subject, comes up. What is the constitution of the spiritual body? And I know Vishnu Prabhu. The way I understood is, while studying, just like this material manifestation, and primarily many scholars have come up to a conclusion of this 28 element, 28 or 24 or 25 or 16, like that.
Mm-hmm.
So all these things are the manifestation of three principal ingredients: mode of goodness, mode of passion, mode of ignorance.
Yes.
So when I was studying in the book, I think Haridas Thakur conversation, Harinam Chintamani, when that mentions about the Sat Chit Ananda. So these are the three aspects, not three aspects, three internal potencies. The Sat feature and Chit feature and Ananda feature, blissfulness, that constitutes the Lord's absolute transcendental body.
Mm-hmm.
And living entity also has this in minimal capacities.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then with sub feature is that physical, the manifestation, existence.
Mm.
And the chit feature is the cognizant aspect.
Mm.
And Ananda feature is the all blissfulness aspect. So because if your physical, the Lord's beauty is of the Sat feature, the Sandhini potency. And with the Chit potency, he comes to know everything, just like we comes to know within our body and within our limits. And Ananda feature is because of the Ananda, he's always blissfulness.
Yeah.
So if you're referring to the transcendental body, the physical, the manifestation, and that cannot be separate from the other two, because it is such that always the Jiva and the Supreme Lord, that always constitutes of these three features, these three aspects of energy of the Lord. So it may appear different manifestations, just like in the material world, it appears different manifestations, millions of manifestations, just
Mm-hmm.
how it's in primary ingredient is more goodness, passion, ignorance. So I had contemplated, so I thought, share, I don't know how much Vishnu. That's
Very
what
nice.
my understanding, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Very nice. Appreciate that. Jonah, I see your hands up.
Hare Krishna.
Hi,
Thank you.
Bill.
Very nice lecture, Balabhadra Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Very informative. I wanted to ask about this idea of God talking to us.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned at the end, it reminded me of a time that there was a Christian football player. He was also an ordained reverend, Reggie White.
Yeah, I know him.
Well known. Recently died. But anyway, he was a free agent, and he was trying to decide, where do I go? Because he's actually from Philadelphia. He played in Philadelphia. He's known in Philadelphia. And he says, I'm going to wait to get a message from God. And one of the coaches from another team had called him up, Mike Holmgren from the Green Bay Packers. And he left a message on his answering machine. He said, hello, Reggie. This is God from the Green Bay. So just kind of you were saying how, we have to be very careful about understanding what we hear. Is it really from God or not?
Yes.
How do we understand that when we make a spiritual decision, decision in the sense that we're turning toward God as opposed to turning toward Maya? Where is that coming from? Is that God speaking to us? Is that direction that's coming directly from the super soul? Or where's that coming from?
No, that's an excellent question. And, and then the immediate response is Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, text 34, which is Tadvidi pranipatena pariprasnena sevaya upite shantite jnanam jnaninas tattva darshana. Just try to learn the truth, which we're trying to understand the truth, by approaching a spiritual master, inquire from him, render service, submissively render service, submissively inquire. The self-realized soul can impart knowledge unto you because he's seen the truth. So for us, it's called Guru Shastra Sadhu. That is the process of making decisions. In the mundane world, you make decisions based on whatever the metrics are, your education, colleagues at work, family. We consult with them about mundane decisions before we spend money, before we invest money, before we buy a car, before we buy even clothing. We get all this kind of input. So in the same way, using a similar principle in Krishna consciousness, especially in Krishna consciousness, because the decisions we make will impact our ability to understand Krishna consciousness and to go back home, back to God, and to make progress in spiritual life. So we should be more careful in decision making in Krishna consciousness. Therefore, for me personally, before I make any major decision in Krishna consciousness, I consult. I have a certain, group of mentors and associates that I'll call them and what about this and what about that? Because I know, because I came up with this one little quote. You've all heard me say it before. You have a right to your opinion, but it doesn't mean your opinion is always right. So I know my opinion is not 100% always correct. So I check it. This is what I'm thinking. Give me your input. And I have men and women persons that I consult with. So my point, Ron, is that in order to get clarity on the decision you think you want to make, consult with those you have faith and trust in to guide you, because right now we're not hearing Krishna 100% purely. It's based on the level of our service, and all of our services or services that we do, the level of devotion we apply to that service is different based on who we are and where we are in Krishna consciousness. I hope that makes sense. In other words, I'm performing with a certain level of priti. You're performing with a certain level of priti. And the result is Dadami Buddhi Yogam. We get the result of Krishna's mercy. As they surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly, which also Maharaj talked about this weekend. These concepts are so interwoven. So then I recognize that my understanding is not 100%. Therefore, I check it with as many trusted associates as possible. Then I come to that decision. And still the decision may not be 100% perfect, but you feel much better when you've done that. So that would be my response, that whenever you're going to make a decision, Krishna consciously, even mundane decision, that's big, important, always consult with trusted associates. So I always consult with devotees first. So I hope that makes a little sense. That's the process I always use.
Yes, thank you very much.
Dr. Bob has his hand up.
Hare Krishna, how are you today? Thank you for taking my question.
Excellent. Good to see you and that beautiful little kid you have there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I have a silly question, and I know you talked about how, Christians will say, God talked to me. God told me to do this. Well, I had a major decision I guess I had to make, and I had been praying on it for the last 2 weeks or so, asking Krishna, give me some guidance, give me some sort of sign, show me some sort of way. How should I make it? And the decision that I had to make was the one I didn't want to make. And everywhere I turned, it would point me to the hard decision, to the decision that I didn't want, whether it be people in my life or something on TV. It led me down that path.
Yeah.
Was that Krishna, or is that me deep down inside saying, you got to make this hard decision, do it? Or was it through Krishna putting people in my life to make that hard decision?
All of the above and even more. Because again, as I said, your intelligence is working. Now, the mind is also working. And the mind is trying to convince you to do everything for sense gratification in the beginning. The mind is suggesting all kinds of sense gratificatory things that you can do. Now, the intelligence, which is higher than the mind, based on the exposure, like Dr. Bob, you have a lot of exposure in Krishna consciousness, so that conflict in decision making is the exposure you've had to Krishna consciousness weighing into where your material experience is there, and they're sort of like fighting with each other a little bit. So the super soul, as I just said, the intelligence is the form direction of the super soul, but that form, like Zoom or any other form, can be obstructed. So your intelligence may be not as developed as you would like for it to be, not as clear. We're trying to clarify this heart and intelligence. So that, yes, the super soul is trying to guide you to do the right things based on the amount of Krishna consciousness you have, and to some degree common sense. You make better decisions. How will this decision impact not only my financial situation, physical situation, family situation, but more importantly, my spiritual situation? So then you look at it like that. So if I do this, this will cause a super negative impact on my ability to practice spiritual life. Or if I don't do this, it will have a major impact on my financial situation, which may also impact my spiritual life. So make the spiritual focus the center of your decision-making process. And as I said earlier, even on those kinds of decisions that you just talked about, if you have a devotee confidant that you can reach out to and help you in even those mundane decisions, which kind of like what you were describing, seems like one of the mundane responsibilities in your life. Even on those kinds of decisions, it's good to have a spiritual confidant that you can share and process it. They may have more spiritual clarity than yourself, even more material clarity than yourself, to help you make those decisions. So to answer your question directly, the Lord is guiding you through your intelligence, but your intelligence needs to be more clear, more improved by devotional service.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Human.
Haribol, Mataji.
Haribol. You gave a very inspiring class.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I have a question. It may sound like a foolish question. Whenever I hear about mind, intelligence, and ego, I feel that they are all related to mind. And why do we mention them separately and not say just about mind?
Yeah, good question, because they're all separate. The mind is one energy, one separate energy. Intelligence is another, and the false ego. They all have three different functions. As I said, the mind is thinking, accepting and rejecting, trying to enjoy sense gratification. But the intelligence is the ability to discriminate. Again, they're unseen. That's why it's hard to see the differences in them. We don't see them, but we see how the mind impacts or affects a person, and we see how intelligence can work to keep the mind in order, because the mind is saying everything is for sense enjoyment. That's in its initial stage. And the intelligence, which is the form direction of the super soul, is trying to make sure you make the right decisions when you're dealing with the mind. And the ego, the false ego, that's the dangerous one. Ahankara vimud atma. Prakriti kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvasaha ahankara vimud atma kartahamiti manyate. So this soul, you and I, okay, bewildered spirit soul, under the influence of the modes of material nature. So this false ego, so you said ego, mind, intelligence. So this ego is this ahankar, this false conception of being this body, which is the first lesson of Bhagavad Gita. We're not the body. Breaks that false ego up. Then we got to get into the mind. And the mind is trying to enjoy everything. Then we find out that Matra Sparsa Dekonteyas, all that, we have to learn to tolerate material life because everything is, sukha dukkha, material, whatever. So we start learning these things. And then the intelligence begins to control that mind. And that false ego, attachment to the body, we begin to lose all that by the help of the intelligence. So the intelligence is so important. So Mataji, they're all three separate. They have three separate identifications, three separate functions. But higher than that is the soul. So wherever the mind wanders, bring it back under the control of the self, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. So it's a whole process of keeping focus. That's called samadhi. See, we think samadhi means sitting in the Himalaya mountains, meditating, blah, blah, blah. That practical samadhi of always keeping the one, the Krishna consciousness in the center of our thinking, will keep everything else in order. The ego, false ego, and then the materialistic mind.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Very nice.
Thank you. So, Dawn, I think it's 9 o'clock, so it's up to you.
This is a good place to end. Thank you, Balabhadra Prabhu, for speaking to us today, giving us your time. Wonderful Krishna Katha. We thank all the devotees for joining us for this morning's Srimad Bhagavatam class. Quick reminder that this evening we have a shloka learning class at 6:40, and that'll be followed by our Srila Prabhupada Leela night, where we're reading and studying books about Srila Prabhupada's life. So please join us this evening, starting at 6:40 to 8 o'clock. Hare Krishna. Everybody have a wonderful Krishna conscious day.
Thank you very much, Prabhu.
Haribo, Benjavali.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Haribo.
Vancha Kalpataru Vishya Kriti
Kripa Sindhu Shabbatitana.
Sindhu